Good morning, guys. So today is our third session on the Spring Boot. In the first session, we discussed about what is Spring Boot, why Spring Boot, what are the advantages with the Spring Boot, and what type of applications we can build using Spring Boot. And in the yesterday session, that is second session, we discussed about how to create boot application and what is folder structure of the boot application and what is start class in the Spring Boot and what is the annotation which is available in the start class. And we started our discussion related to what is component scanning in the Spring Boot, right? So can you tell me how many ways are there to create the boot application? Two ways. By using initializer website, you can create the boot application. By using IDE also, you can create the boot application. When you create by using IDE also, internally it is going to communicate with the initializer website only. And when we create boot application, by default we are getting one Java class with a name called application.java. That Java class is called start class in the Spring Boot. What is the start class in the Spring Boot? Can you tell me what is start class in the Spring Boot? The start class is very important class in the Spring Boot, which is also called as main class in the Spring Boot. And that start class is entry point for boot application execution. When you run the boot application, execution process will start from this start class only. This will be created by default. You no need to write this start class manually, guys. If you create the project, this class is coming by default. And once you open that start class, you can see that there is one annotation in the start class. That annotation is at the rate boot application annotation. What is the purpose of boot application annotation? Which is equal to 3 annotations in the Spring Boot. Okay. One is Spring Boot configuration. Second one is auto configuration. Third one is component scanning. We are understanding what is component scan annotation. So can you tell me what is a component scan annotation? Component scan annotation is used to identify Spring Beans available in the application. So whenever we create the project, start class is available by default. The package which contains this start class is called as a base package. The package which contains the start class is called as a base package. So it is going to check in the base package. Is there any start class package is there having any other classes or not? User DAO available in the same package. This is a component class. What is the meaning of @component? @component means it is a Spring Bean. And we have user service. This is also available in the in.Ashok IT. This is also a component. So when you run your boot application, it is going to scan the base package to identify component classes. Component classes are nothing but Spring Beans. By default, it is a scanning in the base package. And I have created one more package with a name called com.tcs. In that class report service available. For that also I am giving @component. So for this class object is creating, or for this class object is not created. Not created. Why not created? Why not created? The package is not following the naming convention. Let me create one more package here. New class. I'm creating one package with a name called inside the service package. I'm creating a package password service. I'm creating a class with a name called password service. It is available in in.ashokid.service. So let's write a constructor to understand whether this class object is created or not. So I'm writing password service constructor. So this is a normal Java class. I want to make this Java class as a Spring Bean. What is the annotation? What is the annotation, guys? @component annotation we are giving to represent this Java class as a Spring Bean. So this package is following the naming convention or it is not following the naming convention? following the naming convention, because in.ashok IT contains the start class. This package also starting with in.ashok IT. So this in.ashok IT is a base package. This in.ashok IT.service is a sub package for the base package. So when you run boot application, component scanning will happen. Component scanning works on base package of our application. The packages which contains start class of the Spring Boot is called base package, and the packages which are starting with a base package name are called as sub packages. So when you run this application, this package will be scanned because it is a base package which contains start class. What about this service? It is also starting with in.ashok IT. DAO starting with in.ashok IT. Controller util. All these packages are called base packages of in.ashok IT. Those packages will be scanned. Those packages will be scanned to identify bean classes, Spring Bean classes. But what about com.ashok IT? This package will scan, or this package will not be scanned? Will not be scanned. Why this package will not be scanned? Because the base package name is in.ashok IT, the sub package name is com.ashok IT. So it is not following package naming convention. That's why this package will not be scanned. That is default behavior of Spring Boot component scanning. Component scanning is used to identify Spring Beans available in the application. It is working based on base package of the application. So the package which contains a start class is called base package. First it will scan that base package, then it will scan sub packages of the base packages. So in this base package or in the sub packages, if any Spring Bean is available, object will be created. The remaining packages will not be scanned. Suppose I want to configure more than one base package in the application. Is it possible or it is not possible? Can we configure more than one base package in the application? Yes, it is possible. How can we configure more than one base package in the application? By writing component scan annotation. If I don't write the component scan annotation, only one base package will be available. If you want to configure more than one base package, then we need to write a annotation called component scan. For this component scan, we need to specify base packages as a array. Okay, what is our base package? Default base package in.ashok IT. Another package available com.tcs. Okay, now what will happen? It will scan in.ashok IT base package and in.ashok IT sub packages also. And it will scan com.tcs and com.tcs sub packages also. So it is going to consider two base packages in our application. If I remove this annotation, only one base package which is having the start class. Right. Now I am writing in.ashok IT and com.tcs. Now observe, com.tcs is having one Spring Bean class report service. In.ashok IT having user DAO user service. Ashok IT service is having password service. 1, 2, 3, 4. Total 4 Spring Beans available. Objects will be created for how many Spring Beans now? Objects will be created for how many Spring Beans now? For all the 4 Spring Beans, objects will be created when you are using component. Right click, run as boot application. So see the console, password service object is created, user DAO, user service, report service object also created. So that means two base packages are considered or not. So writing component scan annotation is mandatory or it is optional? Writing component scan annotation is mandatory or it is optional? Optional. If I don't write it, what will happen? It will take the start class package as a base package. That package and its sub packages also will be scanned. If you don't want only one base package, if you want to configure multiple, this is the option. But which one is recommended? Writing multiple base packages is recommended. Following the naming convention is recommended. Following the naming convention is recommended. For example, if you are developing a project for Infosys, then how do they write the base package? com.infi.project name. For example, in the Infosys you are developing IRCTC application. They will consider this as a base package. The remaining packages we need to write like this: com.infi.controller, com.infi.service, sorry, com.infi.irctc.controller, com.infi.irctc.service, com.infi.irctc.dao. Like this, they will write the package names. So in this package, start class will be available. The remaining classes will be available in these packages. So this is the naming convention that we need to follow while developing the boot application. So create one project, base package will come. You follow that naming convention for the other packages also. Then you no need to write this component scan annotation. You no need to write this component scan annotation. Suppose if you have two different packages, then definitely you have to write this annotation like this. But mostly people will follow naming convention like this. Are you clear? Very good. Next one. So here I am writing a annotation called @component. So can you tell me what is the meaning of @component? What is the meaning of @component? So that class is represented as a Spring Bean. That class is represented as a Spring Bean. So here there is a question: how to represent Java class as a Spring Bean? How to represent Java class as Spring Bean? So to represent Java class as a Spring Bean, there are several annotations available. It's not like one annotation, guys. There are several annotations available to represent Java class as a Spring Bean. First one, we are using @component. By using @component, our Java class can be represented as a Spring Bean. Similarly, there is another annotation available which is called @service. By using @service annotation also, we can represent our Java class as a Spring Bean. Third one, @repository annotation is also available. Component, service, repository, and we have controller and we have REST controller. Controller is available and REST controller is also available. And we are having one more annotation called @configuration. We have one more annotation called @configuration, and we have one more annotation @bean. So when we are developing our application by using Spring or by using SpringBoot, IOC container will manage our classes. IOC container will create the object for the classes. IOC container will perform dependency injection for the classes. So here, if IOC want to manage our classes, we need to represent our classes as a Spring Beans. To represent our class as a Spring Bean, what are the annotations? Component annotation available, service annotation available, repository annotation available, configuration is available, bean is available, controller is available, and REST controller is also available. Now, let's go here. But as of now, in our project, for all the classes I have given @component. So for DAO, component is there. For service, component available. And for everything, I'm using component only. Password service. Remove the component and write @service. Okay. And here, DAO is available. Remove the component and write @repository. So generally, When you are developing service classes, which contains the business logic, for those classes we are going to use @service annotation. When our class is communicating with the database, those classes are called as repository classes. So the class which contains the business logic as a service, we will write @service annotation. The classes which contains the database access logic, DAOs, are repositories. For those classes, we are going to write @repository annotation. Normal Java classes to represent as a Spring Bean, we will go for component. So this is service repository annotations or belongs to component family only. Component family contains service and repository annotation. You can use any of these three annotations to represent our class as a Spring Bean. But where we will use them? For business classes, we will use @service. For the DAO classes, we are going to use @repository. For normal Java classes to represent as a Spring Bean, we will go for component annotation. Now you see here, DAO class is available. For this DAO class, I am using @repository. For the service class, I am using @service annotation. @service annotation. Service is there @service annotation. For example, I want to create one more Java class in my project .util. Here I am going to take it as email utils. This is responsible to send emails in our application. Okay. For this class, we are writing one constructor. For this class, we are writing one constructor system.out.println. Email utils constructor is available. Email utils constructor. I want to represent as a Spring Bean. We have multiple options, right? We can go for component, we can go for service, we can go for repository. But here, any database communication is available? No. So don't write the repository. So here, you can write a service annotation or you can write a component annotation also. Now let us check it. So this is available in a package called in.ashokit.util package. Is it this package will participate in the component scanning? Will not participate in the component scanning? Will participate or will not participate? Will participate. Why it will participate? Because my base package is in.ashokit. This package is in.ashokit.util. It is going to participate. Run this application. Run as boot application console. Now, object is created or not? Component, service, DAO, password service. For all these classes, objects are created because those are represented by using Spring Bean. @component, @service, @repository. Okay, next one. Here there is a annotation called configuration annotation is available. There is an annotation called configuration annotation. This annotation is a replacement for the XML configuration, guys. If you want to represent your Java class as a configuration class, I want to represent my Java class as a configuration class. To represent our Java class as a configuration class, we are going to use one annotation called @configuration annotation. So let me create one more package, new class in.ashokit.config. in.ashokit.config. Here I'm going to take a class with a name called appconfig. Now I want to represent this class as a configuration class. To represent this class as a configuration class, we will write @configuration annotation. Let us write a constructor here to understand this object is created by IOC or not. Appconfig constructor. Appconfig constructor. What is the annotation I'm using for this class? What is the annotation I'm using for this class? Configuration annotation I am using. So it is available in the config package. So base package are not yet following the base package. Following the base package. So it will participate in the scanning or it will not participate in the scanning. will participate in the scanning. Run as boot application. Go to console. Now app config object is created or not. So what is the purpose of this configuration annotation? We are representing our Java class as a Spring Bean. Component, service, repository, and configuration. Sir, here, if your classes contains some business logic, okay, so then you will represent them by using these annotations. When to go for configuration? When to go for configuration is, observe carefully, component, service, repository. These three annotations we are writing at the class level. These annotations we are writing at the class level. What is the meaning of writing at the class level? On top of the class, we are keeping the annotation. When I keep this annotation at the class level, who is creating object for this class? Programmer is creating the object or IOC creating the object? Programmer creating the object or IOC creating the object? IOC creating the object. So when you go, observe carefully guys, very important topic today. So because without using these annotations, we can't develop the boot application. So if you understand these annotations properly, then only you will understand the remaining classes for next 3 months of time. So every day we are going to use these annotations in the coding part. So what is the purpose of component? Come on. What is the purpose of component? It is used to represent our Java class as a Spring Bean. What is the purpose of service? Represent the class as a Spring Bean. What is the purpose of repository? Represent the class as a Spring Bean. What is the configuration? To represent the class as a Spring Bean. And observe the difference. When we use these annotations at the class level, IOC container creating the object. When we use these annotations at the class level, IOC container creating the object for our class, and IOC will consider that object as a Spring Bean object. Now, in my project, I have a special requirement, guys. In my project, I have a special requirement. I will create one class. I will create one class which is called app security. I'm creating one class with a name called app security. Here I'm writing one constructor. System.out.println app security constructor is created. Now, so this is a Spring Bean or it is a normal Java class? It is a normal Java class. So object will be created or object will not be created? Object will be created or will not be created? No, will not be created. For app security, object is not created. Object is not created. If I write one annotation component, what will happen? Who will create the object? IOC container will create the object. No, I don't want that. I don't want IOC container to create the object for my class because security is specific to application. Okay. My project security is different. Okay. In my project also, for some methods I want security, for some other methods I don't want security. I want to customize that security. So here, what I will do is, I will write the logic for creating security object. Public app security object. I will write my own method. App security is equal to new app security. I will write some logic and I will return security object. Okay. So there are classes available in the project. Some classes I want to create the objects for the classes by using IOC container. For some classes, I don't want IOC container to create the object. I want as a programmer, I want to create the object for that class. I want to manage that object. Okay. Then we will write our own method like this. We will write our own method like this. What I am doing inside this method, guys? What I am doing inside this method? I'm creating the object. I'm customizing that object. I'm returning that object. Now, if I write annotation like this, IOC will create the object. IOC container will create the object. But for the security, I don't want IOC to create the object. As a programmer, I have a special requirement. I will create the object on my own. And I want to tell to IOC, hey IOC, for app security, you don't create the object, I will create the object. But what you need to do is, when the application is started, you call this method. When the application is started, you call, I don't want to call this method. Method is available. Inside the method, logic is available. Now, I want to inform to IOC container, you call this method. It will give the object. You take it as a Spring Bean object. Are you getting my point? Two things here. Do you want IOC to create the object for your class? Go for component service repository. IOC will create object for your class. But my requirement is IOC should not create my object. I will create my own object on my own. I will create the object on my own. But IOC container should call my method, should take my object and represent that object as a Spring Bean object. This is called bean customization. This is called bean customization. When you want to customize the bean creation like this, then for this method, we will write one annotation called @bean annotation. @bean annotation is a method level annotation. So whatever the annotations we have seen, these four annotations are class level annotation. When you use this annotation at the class level, IOC container will create the object for those classes. But when you use bean, this annotation, you cannot write at the class level. If you write @bean at the class level, it is going to fail. Okay. IOC is not accepting the bean at the class level. Okay. So it is not using @bean at the class level. Why it is not using bean at the class level? Because it is a method level annotation. When do we use this annotation at the method level? If you want to customize your objects. So two things here. For few classes, IOC should create the object directly. For few classes, I don't want IOC to create the object. I know how to create the object because I have some special requirement. I will write a method. That method should be called by IOC container. That method will return one object. IOC should consider that object as a Spring Bean object. So here, if you want to customize your bean object creation process, then you will write @bean method like this. So when you want to write such a kind of bean methods, we will use configuration classes. Okay. So if you want to write your bean methods, if you want to create your bean objects programmatically, it's better to write them by using configuration class. So what is the meaning of a configuration class? Which will contain customized bean object creation methods. Which will contain customized bean object creation methods. So now tell me, what is the difference between these annotations and this annotation? What is the difference between these annotations and this annotation? These annotations are class level annotations. This annotation is method level annotation. When to go for this bean annotation? Come on. When to go for bean annotation? If you are writing your own method to create the bean object. If you are writing your own method to create the bean object, then you will go for bean annotation. When you write this bean method, suppose for example, let me remove this annotation. Okay. Now this is a normal Java method. Now observe, app security object will be created or not. If app security object is created, constructor will be executed. Let us run this application. Run as boot application. Now you see security object is created or security object is not created. Not created. Why not created? IOC not calling this method. Why IOC is not calling this method? Why IOC not calling this method? It is a normal Java method only, right? So it is not a bean method. It is not a bean method. IOC not calling. I want to represent this as a bean method. How to represent this as a bean method? By using @bean annotation. By using @bean annotation. Now run this application. Run as boot application. Now you see app security object is created or not. Am I calling that method or IOC calling that method? IOC calling that method. In your project, if you have such a kind of bean methods, it is recommended to keep them inside the configuration classes so that everybody will understand this class contains configuration methods. This is a Java configuration class. In this class, customized beans will be available. So if you don't want to create object on your own, if you want IOC to create the object, directly you can go for these annotations. Component, service, repository. IOC will create the object. But my requirement is different. I don't want IOC to create the object. I will write my method. I will write the logic to create the object. But I want IOC to take my object and consider that object as a Spring Bean. So in the project, several requirements will be available like this. Okay. I want to customize security in my project. I want to customize documentation in my project. I want to customize Kafka configuration in the project, Redis configuration in the project, data source in the project. Like this, several requirements will be available to customize the beans in the project. For some classes, for DAO service controller, IOC will take care. But some special classes will be available in the project. For those special classes, we need to create the object. For that, we are going to use @bean annotation. Whatever the bean methods are there, it is recommended to keep them in the configuration class. How to represent Java class as a configuration class? By using @configuration annotation. Are you able to follow me? So tell me, what is a component? What is component? Component is a annotation to represent Java class as a Spring Bean. What is the service? It is also one annotation to represent Java class as a Spring Bean. What is a repository? That is also annotation to represent Java class as a Spring Bean. Repository will be used for the DAO classes. Service will be used for the business classes. Component will be used for normal Java. Utility classes we will represent as component. What is the configuration? If you want to represent your Java class as a configuration class, then we will go for @configuration annotation. To represent our Java class as a configuration class, we will use @configuration annotation. What logics we will keep inside the configuration classes? What we will write in the configuration class? Bean methods. What we will write, guys? Bean methods. What is the meaning of a bean method? Programmer want to create the objects for few classes. Those methods we are going to keep in the configuration class. For that method, we will write @bean annotation. What is the use of writing @bean annotation? IOC will call our method. Method will return the object. IOC will consider that object as a Spring Bean object. So bean is a special annotation. It can be used only at the method level. Component, service, repository, configuration are class level annotations. Bean is a method level annotation. Now, let us see in the real time where we will use that bean annotation. Where we will use bean annotation. Let me go to my GitHub. There are some projects available. Yeah, I'm going for a project called Kafka project. Kafka producer, SRC, main, Java. Yeah, here can you see service available, order service available. What annotation I am using? Service. Where I am using at that service? At the class level. What is the meaning of at the rate service? That class contains some business logic that to represent that class as a Spring Bean, I'm writing at the rate service annotation. Then come back, go to a package here. There is a package available with a name called config package. What is the meaning of config? Some configuration will be available in the Java based configuration. Go to that class. What is this annotation? At the rate configuration. What is the meaning of at the rate configuration? I want to represent this Java class as a configuration class. Now, here what is this? Producer factory. There is a method. In this method, I am creating the object for the producer factory. I am customizing this producer factory object creation. For this, I am writing one method. For that method, what annotation I am writing? At the rate bean. What is the meaning of at the rate bean? That method will be called by IOC container. What I want to do? Producer factory I want to create. Directly I am creating or I am creating with some customization. So similarly here, Kafka template is available. I am creating object for the Kafka template by passing some other object as an input and I am writing at the rate bean. So what is the meaning of that? So IOC container will call this method, will get the Kafka template object from this method. That Kafka template will be represented as a Spring Bean. Able to follow me? So at the rate configuration is available, at the rate beans available. Service class, IOC will create the object directly, no problem. But for Kafka producer, for Kafka template, programmer want to create the object with the customization. So in the project, some classes we are going to manage by creating the objects on our own. Few classes will be objects created by IOC container directly. Let me go to one more example. Here. Let's go to one example called security example. Spring security example. SpringBoot security register login application is available. Go to this project. RC main Java. Yeah. See the packages available. Service package available. REST package available. Repositories, filters, entities, config. Go to service. So JWT service is available. What is the annotation I'm using? You can use either service or component. Component annotation I'm using. Go for this one. Here, what is the annotation I'm using? At the rate service. What is the meaning of at the rate service? IOC will create the object for my class. Now go to config. App security config available. What is the annotation? Why I am writing at the rate config? I want to customize bean creation. There is a bean available with a name called bcrypt password encoder. I am creating the object. I am returning the object. But who will call this method? IOC content. I don't want IOC to create the object for that class directly. I want to create the object for that class with my own method. For that, I am going to write at the rate bean annotation. Can you see here? Authentication provider. I am creating the object by using at the rate bean. Here, authentication manager, writing the logic to create the object by using at the rate bean. Security filter, I am writing the logic to customize the security. I am writing at the rate bean. So when you want to customize your object creation process, you will write at the rate bean method. That bean methods in the project we are going to write in the configuration class. So in the interview, they will ask a question, what is the difference between configuration and bean annotations? What is the difference between configurations and bean annotation? Configuration annotation is used to represent Java class as a configuration class. What will be there in that configuration class? Bean methods will be available. What is a bean method? The method which will create the object and return the object. Then why we are writing at the rate bean annotation for the method? IOC will call the method. IOC will take the object, will represent that object as a Spring Bean object. Are you able to follow me? Now, when it comes to the Spring Boot, you no need to write this method only in the configuration class. Okay, this class is a configuration class. Here bean method available. Cut this method from here and let us keep this method in the start class. Let us keep this method in the start class. So this method will be called, or method will not be called. Will be called or will not be called? Will not be called or will be called? Will not be called. Will be called or will not be called? Can we see what is the proof whether it is called or not called? Security object will be created, right? System.out.println bean method called. If this message is printed, that means method is called, security object will be created. Run this, run as boot application. Bean method is called or bean method is not called? Bean method is called. But is it, am I writing at the rate configuration here? But still it is calling. The reason is our start class is also a configuration class only. You no need to create a separate configuration class here. Yesterday we discussed that boot application annotation is equal to 3 annotations. So whenever your class is having boot application annotation, that annotation is equal to 3 annotations, guys. What are those 3 annotations? Boot configuration, enable auto configuration, component scan. Now we know what is component scan. What is a component scan? Come on. What is component scan? It is used to identify Spring Beans available in the application. Now let's understand what is boot configuration. So boot configuration annotation will represent our Java class as a configuration class. That means by default, boot start class also will act as a configuration class only. So that is the reason whenever I write this bean method, even though I am not writing the configuration annotation, this method is getting called. Suppose if I remove from here and if I keep in the config class, then what will happen? Then also it will be called. So here, if you want, you can create your own configuration class like this. If you don't want to create your own configuration, you can use start class as a configuration class, because already that start class is having boot application annotation. What is the meaning of boot application annotation? Which is equal to 3 annotations. What are those 3 annotations? Boot configuration, enable auto configuration, third one component scan. Now what is the meaning of boot configuration? It will represent our Java class as a configuration class. So at the rate configuration annotation, at the rate boot configuration annotation, both are same, guys. Both are same. So for if you use at the rate configuration or if you use boot configuration, both are same. Configuration available from the Spring framework onwards, boot configuration introduced in the Spring Boot. So if you go to boot configuration annotation, it is using internally configuration annotation only. So now, can I say my start class is a configuration class? Can I say start class is a configuration class? How can we say that? Because it is having boot application annotation. What is there in the boot application annotation? 3 annotations available. What are those 3 annotations? Spring Boot configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scan. Now tell me, what is boot configuration? It will represent our Java class as a configuration class. What is a component scan? Identify Spring Beans available in the application. What is the difference between component and bean annotation? What is the difference between at the rate component and at the rate bean annotation? At the rate component is a class level annotation, bean is a method level annotation. What is the difference between them? What is the difference between at the rate component and at the rate bean? @component annotation is a class level annotation. IOC will create the object for that class. What is @bean? Method level annotation. Programmer will create the object by using bean method. IOC will call the bean method. So these are interview questions. Difference between component and bean. Difference between configuration and bean. What is the start class in the Spring Boot? What is the boot application annotation? What is a component scan? How to scan multiple base packages in the Spring Boot? These all are important concepts and fundamentals of the Spring Boot. Are you able to understand? Yes. So recently I have posted one reel also in the Insta. Top 10 Spring Boot annotations. And anybody gone through that video? In that video, I have explained these annotations only. What is a component, what is a configuration, what is bean, what is controller, REST controller. In the Instagram, I think 3-4 days back, I posted one reel. So top 10 annotations in the Spring Boot. What is boot application, what is component, what is configuration, what is bean, what is controller, what is REST controller, what is auto wiring. All these annotations within 2 minutes I have explained. That is just for revision purpose, right? Okay, you got the clarity? What is the purpose of these annotations now? Component, service, repository, configuration, and bean. Next one, controller is available, REST controller is available. Controller to handle HTTP requests in web application. So when we are developing web application with C2B communication, if you click login button, login method should be executed. If you click register button, register method should be executed. For that we are going to use @controller annotation. Here, similarly, we are having REST controller annotation also to handle HTTP requests, in REST APIs. So when you are developing normal web application, we will go for controller annotation. Controller, REST controller, also class level annotations only. To represent your Java class as a controller, we will go for @controller annotation. If you want to represent your Java class as a REST API, then you will go for @REST controller. Very famous interview question. What is the difference between controller and REST controller? Controller will return view pages as a response, login page, register page, something like that. REST controller will return direct response to the client. So when you are developing B2B applications with the REST APIs, we will go for REST controller. When we are developing web application with the presentation logic, then we will go for controller. So we are going to practice these annotations in the WebMVC module. So we are currently in the Spring Boot. After Spring Boot, data JPA is there. After data JPA, WebMVC will come. Once you go for WebMVC module to develop web applications, at that time we are going to use controller annotation and REST controller annotations. Those are also class level annotations. You see in my project here, Spring Security main Java. Here if you see there is a REST package available, customer REST controller. What is the annotation is available? @REST controller. Where I am writing that? Excuse me. I'm writing that annotation at the class level. What is the purpose of that annotation? To represent our Java class as a Spring Bean. So to represent our Java class as a Spring Bean, we can use either controller or we can use REST controller. They will handle HTTP requests which are coming to our application. They will handle the requests which are coming to our application. Okay. So these are the important annotations in the Spring Boot now. Component, service, repository, configuration, bean, controller, and REST controller. Are you clear? Good. So we got some clarity on what is the start class annotation now. What is the start class in the Spring Boot? What is the start class in the Spring Boot? Start class is the entry point for boot application. Entry point for boot application. Okay. Next here, let me tell what is the component, what is the service, and what is repository. What is the purpose of this? To represent Java class as Spring Bean. What is the purpose of service? Same. Repository, same. Purpose? To represent Java class as configuration class. What is the purpose of bean? To customize objects creation process. This is special. Why it is special? It is a method level annotation. Controller to handle HTTP request in the web application. What is a component scan? To scan Spring Bean in our project. So which classes are represented as Spring Beans? It is going to scan the project and it will identify those classes and will give them to IOC container. IOC container will create object for those classes. IOC container will manage dependency injection for those classes. You got the clarity? What is component scan? Yeah. Read the annotations now. Component, service, repository, configuration, bean, controller, REST controller, and component scan. So now, what is this Spring Boot application annotation? What is Spring Boot application annotation? That annotation is available at the start class equal to 3 annotations. What are those 3? Configuration, auto configuration, component scan. What is auto configuration? What is auto configuration in the Spring Boot? It will identify the configuration required for the application. Like if you add a web starter, Tomcat server is starting. Okay. If you add the security starter, login page is coming. If you add the JPA starter, connection pool is creating. Based on the starters in the pom.xml, IOC container will provide the configuration to run our application. That is called auto configuration. Clear? Good. Next one, we are going for a run method. Okay. So run method is the entry point for boot application. Run method is entry point for boot application. When you run the boot application, the execution will begin from the start class. Inside the start class, main method is available. Inside the main method, run method is available. That run method will execute some logic. Let us see what is the logic in the run method. Go to this run method. Go to this run method and go inside this. Now, this is the logic which is available in the run method. Just read these lines. Just to go through them from top to bottom. You no need to by heart that, guys. You no need to by heart because are we going to write that logic? Already that logic is there. We are using that logic. That's it. When we call the run method, that logic will be executed. Let us see what is there in that logic. You just go through them. Just read line by line. That's it. Startup.create. Okay. Then shutdown hook it is checking. Creating the bootstrap context. It is getting the listeners. Listeners that starting, application arguments, preparing the environment, printing the banner, creating the application context, setting the application startup, prepare context, refresh context, startup.started, logger information is printing, then it is calling the runners, then finally it is returning the context object. Okay. So inside this run method, lot of logic is available, which is used to start our application. It is a printing banner for our application. It is starting IOC container for our application. It is calling runners in our application, finally it is returning context object. This context is called IOC container. Okay, what is the return type of the run method? The return type of the run method is IOC container object. So in the Spring framework, we need to write the logic to start the IOC, whereas in the Spring Boot, run method will start the IOC, run method will provide the IOC for us. Okay, let us store the run method return type. What is the return type of the run method? Configurable application context. So that is IOC container object. So when we call this run method, we are getting IOC object as a return type. Using that IOC object, you can get your beans and you can call the methods of your beans. So in the Spring, what we have done? Application context is equal to new class path XML application context. We use it to create the object manually to start the IOC. But in the boot, you no need to write the logic to start the IOC because run method is already creating the object for the IOC. That run method will return the object of the IOC container. Using that IOC container, you can get your beans and you can call your bean methods also. Able to follow this? Perfect. Good. Now, inside this run method, what is happening? Okay. So initially you may not get the complete picture what is happening inside the run method. So first assume that this is our run method. This is our run method. It is going to check the startup time when our application is getting started, and it is going to prepare bootstrap context. It is going to prepare some bootstrap context. Then it is going to prepare environment required for the application. Okay. Then it is going to start some listeners required for the application. Then it is going to print a banner of our application. Then it is going to create IOC container required for the application. Then it will prepare IOC context. Then it will call runners. Finally, return context. Okay. So these are the things that are happening inside run method of the Spring Boot start class. So when you execute boot application, run method will start. It will note down the startup time. It will prepare the bootstrap context. It will prepare the environment to run the application. It will start the listeners to run our application. It will print a banner on the console. It will create the IOC container. It will prepare the IOC container. It will call the runners in the application. Finally, it is going to return IOC context object. Finally, it is going to return IOC context object. Okay. So look at the diagram. This is the internal workflow of our run method. If anybody asks you what is the run method in the Spring Boot, then you have to explain this. Internally, lot of code is executing, but finally, what is the output we are getting from the run method? Finally, we are getting context object from the run method. Now here, banner it is printing, right? You can customize the banner also. You can stop the banner also. All the customizations we are going to learn. Okay, good. So today we discussed about what is component scanning, how do we configure more than one base package in the Spring Boot application, and some annotations that we discussed, how to represent Java class as a Spring Bean. In the tomorrow session, we are going to understand internals of that run method, customization of that bean, and how it is creating the IOC object, which class it is using to create the IOC object, that we are going to learn in the tomorrow session. So you guys also do some analysis by going through the run method, how that run method is getting executed. In the tomorrow, we are going to learn all these concepts. What is happening in the each and every stage of this process in the run method, and how to customize this banner in the run method, and we will focus more on IOC, which class it is using to start the IOC container, okay, and how to get the bean object from the IOC container, we will learn. Then after, we are going to discuss about what is a runner in the Spring Boot. Okay, so once these topics are done, our start class will be completed. Then we need to jump into actual topics like auto wiring, dependency injections, and all that part. Clear? Any questions, anyone? And tomorrow, regular class available in the morning. Morning 7:30 project is there. 9:30 boot is available. Tomorrow evening 5:30 Jenkins workshop is available. Okay, tomorrow evening Jenkins workshop is available at 5:30. Offline and online class is there. Don't miss. I'm not going to explain Jenkins once again. So tomorrow Jenkins class you have to attend for that. And Sunday morning online workshop available. How to integrate Chat GPT with the Spring Boot application. Okay, Sunday workshop is also important. So 2 workshops this weekend, Jenkins workshop and Spring Boot with ChatGPT integration workshop. You have to attend both. Good. Thank you guys. With this, I'm stopping for today. We'll continue in the tomorrow session.